This session is going to be pretty introductory, and it's going to cover a lot of different topics related to research and productivity and various tools that you can use that are both NIU tools, some from the university libraries, as well as tools that you can either subscribe to for free or those that have subscriptions. And here's the agenda for today. I'm going to give an overview of the technologies that I'm talking about, really specifically some generative AI tools. I'm going to cover an ethical framework that you can use when in your approaches to really any AI tool so that you're approaching AI responsibly. And then the last half, I'm going to cover tools for productivity. So tools that you can use to help you in your research productivity, to help you stay organized, to help you break down tasks, and tools for discovery. And what I mean by discovery is finding sources for your research. So we'll look at a couple of different tools, again, some that the library subscribes to and some that are external tools that you might want to try out in your research. And all of this is a very individual decision based on what you think is going to be helpful to how you work in your research process. But it hopefully will give you some options that you haven't tried or maybe aren't aware of. All right, so to start us off, and full disclosure that I am about a 3 with AI. I do not have a computer science background. However, as a librarian, my degree is in information science. So this is definitely an area that is relevant to my work. So generative AI is a system of computer processes that can create new text, images, or other media based on a user's prompt. You're probably familiar with things like ChatGPT, for instance. It is this larger circle that is considered artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence has been around for a very long time. Within that circle, we have machine learning, deep learning, and then in the center, the smallest circle is generative AI. So generative AI is just one type of artificial intelligence, one that has really rapidly grown over the past 2 or 3 years. And that is the area that we're going to be focusing on today. So how does generative artificial intelligence, how does it know stuff? Spoiler alert that it doesn't know anything. LLMs, or large language models, which is what we refer to generative AI tools as, how they are used or how they're created is that they're exposed to really large data sets, such as books, websites, images. I know that Reddit was scraped and used for OpenAI's models. And that gives the computer model a general structure and pattern for human language, also for images, for video, for sound. So for instance, an artificial intelligence tool that creates music using artificial intelligence will have ingested all sorts of music. And that program picks up on sounds and how sounds are used together and lyrics, and it creates these sort of tokens that are patterns that are recognized by the system. Now, the system doesn't think, it doesn't understand what it's doing, it doesn't have consciousness. We do talk about it like that, about thinking and knowing and doing, but these are computer programs, so they do have limitations. Then, after they are pre-trained on those large data sets, they are fine-tuned. And this uses human oversight, so supervised data labeling, which customizes that general knowledge that was gained through the pre-training, and it converts it into a targeted and practical model designed for specific uses. So you have tools out there that are very general, generic sorts of chatbots like Copilot and ChatGPT and Claude, and we'll talk about how we can use some of those. But there are also tools that have been really fine-tuned for specific purposes. And those are those research tools that we'll look at in the later half. And those use what's called retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. So what that is it takes a specific set of information, external information, such as documents, databases, or websites that ground the model's responses. So it's not just using these language patterns that it found in that pre-training, but it is actually referencing a specific set of material. All right, so in the chat, if you could put, just thinking, in the news or things that you've talked with colleagues about, what are some problems that there are with AI models using stuff that it found on the internet for training? So considering that pre-tuning, that a lot of these models have been trained using the open internet, what are some problems that are associated with that? Okay, great. Privacy. As a librarian, that is one that really concerns me, and we'll talk a little bit more about privacy in this ethical model. All right, so I have a lot of snippets from news that covers some of the large issues that we see with generative AI models. The first one on the left says generative AI, the UNESCO study reveals alarming evidence of regressive gender stereotypes. So these large language models, they repeat the patterns that they find on what they're trained with. If something exists, if there's a bias that exists in the language it was trained with, it is going to repeat that in its outputs. There are some safeguards in some companies that have addressed this, but we still see the biases of the internet being reproduced with these AI models. Below that is a report that there is some emerging research showing that humans are actually starting to inherit these biases. So because humans are using these tools, they are actually seeing that human language is starting to kind of reflect the language of these AI tools. So it's really interesting. It's like we're training it and it is training us. So that is a concern as well. In the middle, we have the concern of copyright. And there's a huge lawsuit against OpenAI and some other companies about the use of materials to train it. So for instance, the New York Times found that those models could really easily kind of almost reproduce a New York Times article that was copyright protected because it was trained using that data without permission. So there are some copyright considerations as well. We're also seeing, unfortunately, in research that there is a lot of AI-generated text coming out that sometimes isn't being checked. So this statistic says that there are signs of AI-generated text in 14% of biomedical abstracts. So this number is definitely increasing. And there have been instances where that text hasn't even been altered, and people can tell because it will also include the prompt or other language that the system uses, or it uses patterns that are pretty typical of those language models. Right below that, we have some emerging research about the impact of using these models on your brain. And it's found that there's a potential cognitive impact on certain users when they're using things like ChatGPT to write essays. Below that is AI hallucinations. So AI hallucinations are things that the systems will confidently give you a citation, but the citation doesn't exist. And I'll say that we as librarians are seeing this all the time in our library here at NIU. People looking for published research that doesn't exist because it's something that was hallucinated by a generative AI model. And then finally, a big one that's talked about a lot is the energy consumption and water consumption, the effect on our planet. This is really hard to calculate. However, a recent study tried to calculate it and found that data centers in 2024 used up roughly the amount of power that it takes to power Thailand for 1 year. So although we don't quite know the impact of things like training and use of these models, we do know that it is having an impact. So it's something that we want to consider. So here's the ethical model that I want to introduce to you as you go about using AI and considering which tools to use and how to use them. Again, after this ethical model, I will get into the tools and show you some ways that you can use them to enhance your productivity and your research. However, I really wanted to start with this framework because I think it's important, considering all those previous issues that we looked at, that we approach the use of AI really thoughtfully and critically. So PEACE, what it stands for. First of all, policies. Before you use a tool that has AI embedded within it, or as an AI chatbot, for instance, consider, does use of this tool comply with relevant laws and policies? And NIU has been creating policies internally for both for students and for faculty and staff. So that is something that you can reference. Does using this particular tool comply with those policies? Ethics, does it align with ethical standards and values? This one can refer to your personal ethics, but also the ethics of your profession. So many professions have released statements or ethical standards or guidelines related to the use of AI. So that's something you want to be familiar with. Agency, and this one gets at that privacy issue. Do you retain control over your data and its use? Of course, we're used to just clicking accept when we go through privacy policies, but I think it's increasingly important that we understand what we are agreeing to. There have been instances where people's conversations, private conversations with ChatGPT that they've been using like a therapist, have been shared publicly. So being aware of what the privacy policies are is really important. This is the one that I think is most important for the work that I do, critical thinking. Does use of the tool support rather than replace your own thinking and learning? Because as we saw previously, there's some emerging research showing that it can have a negative impact on critical thinking, depending on how it's used. And then finally, environment. Again, we can't quite know the impact, but we know that there is an impact. So considering the impact, do the benefits justify the environmental impact? So for instance, when generative AI first had a splash a couple of years ago, I was using it a lot for things like creating memes to share with my friends until I really understood the environmental impact. And I started being a little bit more judicious about how I was using these tools. Now I want you to put this framework into use. So using the questions in the peaceful use of AI framework, what are some potential issues in this example? So on the left, I have the example that I'll read out loud. And then on the right, I have those questions from the peaceful use of AI model for you to think through. And if you can think of some of the issues that might be related to those questions and this example, put it in the chat. So the example is this. A researcher asked ChatGPT, what's the studies say about the impact of intramural sports on student belonging? She publishes a paper using ChatGPT's response. She puts it in her own words and includes the citations that ChatGPT provided. So what are some, considering over here these questions from the framework, what are some of the potential issues with this researcher's use of ChatGPT in their research? I'll give you a few minutes to think and put some thoughts in the chat. What are some potential issues in this example? So the researcher is using this to do her research. And as we'll learn in a little bit, there are tools that researchers can use to supplement their research. However, these models don't always do the best or most thorough job in finding research because they don't have access to all of the resources. We'll cover this in a little bit. So is the researcher really doing their best work? And then we can't control the data it uses. So yeah, in this example, it just says ChatGPT. I didn't specify whether or not they had an account that they pay for. But if you don't pay for an account, you have different, there are different privacy regulations. So Copilot, which we have here at NIU, that data is protected, but if somebody doesn't have that institutional license and isn't paying for it, then there's a different sharing of the data. So there are some privacy concerns. Looking at some of these other ones, the ethical standards and values and laws and policies, many journals have rules about using AI and how it can be used and whether or not it needs to be disclosed. So we don't know what journal this researcher is writing for, but we can guess that there's probably some policy in place that covers the use of AI. So that's something to consider. And then, do the benefits justify the environmental impact? Again, that one's a really tricky one, but I would ask that researcher, is she familiar with doing research in other ways? And what is she gaining out of using ChatGPT for this? Maybe she is gaining something different, but if not, then maybe sticking with other methods. Okay, so let's get into the actual tools and how to use them. I'm going to start with planning. So planning covers things like refining your research question, developing a research strategy, and planning a research timeline, and breaking down tasks. So this is the stuff that can be really helpful when you're just starting out with your research and you're feeling really overwhelmed. You don't know kind of how to get started or what all the tasks look like. And I personally have that feeling of overwhelm. And when I do, I procrastinate and, things just start piling up. So this is an area where generative AI can be used ethically and really productively to help you get unstuck and move you past your moment of trying to come up with a question, a strategy, and a timeline. So the first tool that I will talk about is Microsoft Copilot. Microsoft Copilot can be used with text, voice, and image. It is now based on GPT-5, so it does use OpenAI's model and DALL-E 3 for images. It uses web grounding, so that retrieval augmented generation that I talked about before. It uses web searching to provide additional information. Also, since we have a license here at NIU, it can look at the files that you're using within Microsoft, so an Excel file, Word, and it can produce stuff based off of that. Again, it has commercial data protection when accessed using your NIU credentials. So make sure when you're using Copilot that you are using it through NIU, because if not, then you might not have those data protections. So let's see how to use it in a research scenario. In this scenario, this is a way that you can use you could use ChatGPT this way, but you could use Copilot to refine your research question. So a lot of times people are starting out with their research and they might have a general idea of the area that they want to research in, but they're having a hard time really narrowing down the topic. Generative AI is a great tool to use for brainstorming. So this is a prompt guide on how you can really maximize the use of Copilot or any other generative AI system to give you the results that you're expecting. And this is specific to research. So when creating a prompt, it's important to have especially these first two pieces, a goal and context. So for example, if you were having it refine a research question, the goal is for that model to refine your research question, and the context is the desired purpose and the desired output. You can also add expectations. So what parameters are you giving that model that you want, let's say you want their response to be in bullet points. For instance, you want their response to give you 12 different examples. You can give it parameters. And then optionally, you can give it a source that you want it to reference. So maybe you have an assignment or something else that you've written. You can tell Copilot, use this source to inform your response. So how you do this with refining a research question. You would put as your prompt all of these pieces together. Refine my research question. How did women's fashion change during World War II? So you have this general idea that you want to do something with women's fashion and World War II, but you're needing some more ideas. You're kind of stuck. So the context is so that I can begin research for a 10-page paper requiring use of primary and secondary sources. So you're giving it a little bit more context for how you're going to use their suggestions. And then your expectations. So in this example, the examples should be a mix of more broad and more narrow research questions, but should relate to women and World War II. Again, the source is kind of an optional one, but if you can have these three pieces, goal, context, and expectations, you're going to get a much better response from Copilot or any other generative AI. I want you to give this a try. So here's another scenario. We have this student here, a history student, who is doing some research, and they know that they want to do something about the Middle Ages. So their research prompt right now is they want research topic ideas about the Middle Ages. We know that that is very broad and doesn't give a lot of instructions to Copilot. So try it out. You can make up the details, make up the context for this imaginary example, but add what you would want Copilot to do, the specific context, such as what course is this for? Is this a grad course, undergrad? What is the discipline? Are there any constraints like length for the paper, the specific time period, types of sources? I want you to rewrite her prompt, research topic ideas about the Middle Ages, to make it more specific using those guidelines. And go ahead and put that in the chat. Again, there's no wrong answer, and you can get creative with this. This is especially useful for times when you're feeling kind of stuck. Again, you just want some brainstorming. But the more specific you can be with context and expectations and the goal, the better. Remember, though, that this should always be human-led, that you are in charge. So human curiosity leads to human research. It can be tempting when you're overwhelmed to just go with, the first thing that maybe the AI model gives you, but it's best to really take what you are most interested in, what ideas kind of spark your creativity and your research interests. Do some additional research on those because, again, these models can hallucinate and make things up. So you always want to fact check and then go back and refine your research question. So when I've done this before, I've gotten, 20 different research topics, and I would be very unlikely that I would actually pick one of those 20 word for word. I would do some research and then refine it to make it my own. And it's important that we keep the human in this process. So here's another way that you can use Copilot in your research planning phase. Let's say you have your research topic, and now you need to move to a research strategy. You have a topic, but you're just not quite sure where to begin. So you can do this same thing for creating a research strategy. Again, you want to have a goal, context, and expectations, and optionally inform it with a source. So in this example, this person says, suggest research strategies to get me started on this research question. How did the experiences of Black women in wartime industrial roles during World War II challenge or reinforce fashion norms? So that's the question that they decided to go with. And then the context, so that I can begin identifying resources to consult to write a 10-page paper requiring use of primary and secondary sources. And the expectation, your suggestions should identify potential strategies that are appropriate for an undergraduate student. So this is important to specify, again, because if you are working on your PhD, or versus if you are an undergraduate student, those expectations are going to be very different. So you want to be clear about that. And then optionally, you can ground their response in a certain source. So in this example, I'm using a research guide that our history librarian created as a source to ground their response in. So we have the example of using Copilot to refine research questions, to give you more ideas, and to create a research strategy. We're going to look at one more planning tool before we dive into the tools for finding research. But I want to bring it back to this peaceful use of AI. In each step of this, consider this framework and really specifically that critical thinking piece. It's all about how you're using the tool. It's not usually whether or not you're using an AI tool, but how you're using it. And consider, does it support rather than replace your own thinking and learning? Because we know that things like writing and researching can be hard, and these tools can make it easier, and it's great. But we don't want to do that at the cost of our own thinking and learning and our own personal development. So that's something to just keep in mind throughout this process. And remember in this second example of using something like Copilot to draft a research strategy, that there are people like librarians who specialize in research in these areas who can help you one-on-one, in person or virtually, on your research topic, your research strategy, timeline, what sources to look for, etc. And nothing replaces a human. I don't care how good these AI models get, they are not human and they do not have human judgment. So remember those tools and to use them appropriately. Okay, the last planning tool that I want to share with you is called Goblin Tools. Is anyone familiar with this one yet? I'm going to, no, okay, I'm going to copy and paste this link in the chat. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about it and how you can use it in research. All right, let's talk about Goblin Tools. So Goblin Tools it's a website, but you can also get an app. Yeah, you're welcome. The app costs, I think, $2, $3 from the App Store. The website is free to use, and you do not need to create an account to use it. The person who created this is neurodivergent, and they created it for other people who are neurodivergent to help them do certain things that can be hard, like planning and judging the tones of emails. It has all sorts of different tools. But one that I think is particularly useful for research is the magic to-do list. What this is you can put in a task, something that you need to do, and you'll see those little chili peppers on the right. That's the spiciness level. So people who are neurodivergent, like ADHD and autism, sometimes refer to themselves as neurospicy. So that's what the peppers are about. And the more peppers, the more assistance you're asking for, the more that you want the system to break down the task for you. So if you're feeling like super overwhelmed and you really need to be walked through a complex task, you can increase the amount of chili peppers. If you're feeling pretty confident and you just need a little extra help, maybe 1 chili pepper is good enough. But you put your task in, and then you'll click on a magic wand, and it will break down a complex task into subtasks that you can then check off. So let's say you are working on a dissertation that is a very big project, you can use this tool to kind of help walk you through the process of that and break it down into subtasks. And what's really fun is that it can also give you time estimates for each of those subtasks. So I'm going to have you try this tool out. So in the chat, you'll see the link to Goblin Tools. Try to put a complex task into the magic to do. You'll see magic to do there. Adjust the spiciness level to however you want it, and then click that plus button. When you click the plus button, it will add the task to your to-do list. The next step is to click on the magic wand. The magic wand will break down that complex task into subtasks to make it more manageable. After you've done that, click on the three dots next to the individual tasks, and you're going to click on Estimate. That's going to give you a time estimate for those individual tasks. So go ahead and try that out with any complex task you can think of. My example is that I need to clean my house, but it could be maybe something with a paper or project that you have due, something that is complex and maybe feels a little bit overwhelming. Give that a try. I'm going to give you just about 2 or 3 minutes. So at we'll say 4:44, I'll come back and continue the presentation, but just give this a try. If you have any questions, put it in the chat. All right. So I hope you had a chance to play around with it. There are a ton more tools in Goblin Tools. One thing that I like about them too is that the creator is really dedicated to the ethical use of AI, and so uses AI models that are typically a little bit more ethical, and they respect your privacy, so a more generous privacy policy than some of the other tools that you may use. So that is one reason I like it. I think it's just a really fun tool, and there are a lot of different options in it. But we're going to move on now to look at discovery tools. So these are AI or AI-enhanced tools that can help you find sources related to your research. It can help you discover connections between those sources and summarize concepts. Most of this is going to be a really brief overview. There are so many tools in this category. I've just picked out a few that have a little bit more of a reputation and track record. So we're going to actually start with tools that you'll see in our NIU libraries databases. So what I have here is a screenshot of the database that is called Academic Search Complete. It's a database owned by the company, the vendor EBSCO. So some people say they might be familiar with that, EBSCO. They own many of the databases that we subscribe to, and you're going to see this natural language search feature in all of those EBSCO databases. So what this is this natural language search, which is toggled on in the screenshot here, enables you to search within the database the way that you would search using something like Google. So if you've had experience searching in library databases before, you'll know that you have to use keywords and things called Boolean operators like and, or, and not to really get the results you're looking for. Now they're using this option, or they're offering this option called natural language search that allows you to search more like you'd search Google. And what this does is it will match the words that you use. So in this example, I'm searching a full sentence. How can AI be used in educational settings to promote learning for individuals with autism? And it's going to map it to actual search terms. So let me show you what happens with this. When I am searching, and I'll show you just a second, I'll show you how to find this, and then I'll let you test it out. So when I have searched using natural language like that, the AI system is actually going to look at the words that I used and the context in which I'm using them, the order that I'm using them, and it's going to match it to a more advanced search. So when I click on this show refined query, it's going to show me how it's matching my words with a more advanced kind of refined search, how the professional librarians would probably search. So this is the very complex, complicated search that it's actually running for the question that I put in there. What's nice about this is this can actually kind of teach you how to do this advanced searching. So this is a skill to learn how to do the advanced searching like this. And it's one that can be a little complicated at first. So maybe you start out by using natural language, looking at the refined query, but then learning from looking at the refined query some tips on how to really maximize your searches. So here it is using the term AI or artificial intelligence or machine learning or automated systems. This is a Boolean, those ORs are called Boolean operators. So any of those words plus any of these words plus any of these words. So it's using this really complex query to get the results that will best match my question. Now, if you know how to search like this, that's going to be best because you have the most control over it. But I mean, look at that. Most of us, do not know how to search that way. So starting out with natural language can be really useful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the chat now the link to Academic Search Complete. You can get to this by going to the library's website and clicking on databases, but I'm just giving you a direct link right now. And this will work with any of our EBSCOhost databases. So if you see EBSCOhost, this tool will be there. However, you have to do a search first to get to this screen. So here are the instructions. Click on Academic Search Complete, that link that I put in the chat. In the search box that comes up, type a keyword, any keyword related to your research. So technology, for instance. After you've done that initial search, that's when you're going to see that screen with the toggle to put natural language searching on. Go ahead and replace that keyword with a natural language, so some sort of sentence. And then view the refined query. I want you to, if you can, copy and paste the query that it gives you, so that long string of and or ors, and put it in the chat, just because I'm curious to see what it comes up with for you. I'm going to leave these instructions up, but if you have questions, let me know as you try this out yourself. One thing that I'll note is if you are used to using Boolean operators like the ands and ors, natural language search, if you have it on, isn't going to work well. So it's kind of one or the other. Either use the natural language search or use the Boolean operators. But it's a really nice way to learn how to use those Boolean operators well. And yeah, to see that, you'll click Show Refined Query, and it'll show you kind of how it parsed out your question or your topic. So if the database looks like this, then it'll probably have that natural language search option. It's in all of our EBSCO databases, which is about half the databases we subscribe to, but it'll only come up after that initial search. That might change where it's becoming more and more embedded within our databases. So you might see that in some other tools. Speaking of some other tools, we only have a couple of minutes, and I'm only just going to kind of give you a broad overview about these tools because these are not ones that the library provides or that the university provides, but all of them except for Elicit are free. Often they'll have some paid features, but these are free tools that have been around for a long time. We're seeing a lot of new tools that haven't been around for a very long time, so I don't always like to recommend those, but these have been around. And these can also help you find research. So the first one is Semantic Scholar, If you are familiar with Google Scholar, this is kind of similar to it. It is an AI-powered tool that acts kind of like a database. It crawls the web looking for articles and information about articles, and it indexes over 200 million papers from different sources. So it's like Google Scholar, you can search in there. It may or may not have the full article though, so that's something to be aware of. It has a couple of other features that I'll show you in a second that make it advantageous to use over some other databases. Google Scholar is another tool that you can use, and you're probably already using. I use Google Scholar. You can connect Google Scholar with the university libraries, and I'll send you the information of how to do that after this webinar. But you can connect it with our library so that you can actually get the full text articles. They also have introduced Scholar Labs recently, which also provides summaries of articles. So before it was just kind of a search engine. Now it gives you summaries, so you can kind of glance over a list of results and read those summaries to figure out if it's research that you want to keep pursuing. Research Rabbit, which I'll show you in a second also, is a tool that uses Semantic Scholar. So it uses that database, but then it visually maps the sources to show you connections between research. And it's a really good way to find related research. And then Elicit, I won't be showing this one today, but it's something that I think is worth checking out. It creates a matrix based on your research topic or question that compares research. So if you have a research question, it will look for I think it's something like 6 most relevant sources, and it will put it in a table that kind of summarizes each part of that source. So the methods, the findings, all of that. So you can kind of quickly glance at something. So this is Semantic Scholar, again, free to use, and looks pretty similar to Google Scholar. What's nice about it is when you are searching, it has this TLDR, too long didn't read, which is a summary of the article. So abstracts are summaries provided by the author, but this uses the AI language model to kind of just give you a really brief summary to find the main points of the article. So that's kind of a nice feature. And here's Research Rabbit. Research Rabbit is a great tool, again, for finding related research. So I put an article in that I wrote, and if you do search for an author, a title, or just a keyword search in Research Rabbit, you can do things like find similar research. So on the bottom right, it has 186 similar papers. It says it's been cited by 6, so it'll show you those 6. That's not entirely true. It's been cited by more than that, but 6 that this system knows about, and 19 references. So it's a way to explore similar research. And when I click on that similar button, this is where it gives me that visual relationship thing in the middle there. This is dynamic. So if I were to click on one of these, it would expand out, but it's showing me who I've cited and then things that have cited. So it's kind of giving you the universe of researchers related to that specific topic or paper. So if you're a visual learner, it can be really cool. It also connects with Zotero, the citation management software. So if you use Zotero, you can connect it to upload all of the research that you've collected and find those relationships. All right. That's a lot of tools, a lot of information and strategies, but I'm hoping that you learned something new, that you feel more comfortable, and that you have, I think most importantly, an ethical framework to guide your use of these tools in your research planning and your discovery of research.